future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
And greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome to another fabulous episode of Dr. Judy WTF. I am your host, Walt Lusk. And, of course, we have Dr. Judy Rosenberg in studio today. We are finishing up, we're darn close to finishing our series of the 9 panels of the mind map that Dr. Judy's fabulously invented and created about 12 years ago. And, as usual, we're going to have 2 great classic songs that we're going to shrink that tune later, so stay tuned on that one. And we're going to do a quick overview of where we are in our mind map to make sure we're not lost and bewildered, and then dive into the 8th panel of the 9-panel mind map. So, and this is also, don't forget, this is a call-in show. So if you want to call in, we always say don't explode or implode, but unload and get on the couch of Dr. Judy. The number is area code 323-843-2826. And you can check us out at www.info. Well, you can email us at info@drjudy.com, or you can check us out at www.drjudywtf.com. So what's new, Doctor?
Well, first of all, it is a call-in show, and we love call-ins because, after all, this is for you to really express and unload, and for me to have the opportunity to analyze. And for those of you who are listening for the first time, you may have noticed the theme of our show song, which is?
Well, I'm a big movie buff, so it's actually from the original first movie of the Matrix series. It's titled Club to Death.
And Club to Death is very appropriate because we talk a lot during our discussions about the hole in the soul, which comes from mother-infant disconnect and the injuries and the wounds of childhood. So Club to Death, I think, is very appropriate, and plus the fact that the mind map is a matrix, which is a series of informational panels that interconnect and actually reveal a process which I call a from, through, to process. From the problem and its creation, through the dismantling of the problem or how it dismantles you, and to the paradigm shift into solution. So with the theme of the matrix and the theme of the mind map, which is a matrix of information that we're going to be presenting, I think that we've got a match here in terms of our theme song. Don't you think so?
It works for me. Yeah, it was kind of semi-subliminal. I was actually trying to find a tune when we first started the show almost a year ago. It's absolutely amazing. And came up with it, and Judy figured out what the song was from, what it was about. It was pretty amazing.
And it was coincidental as opposed to coincidental. So just a little bit about why we call the show Dr. Judy WTF. Well, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, so obviously that's the doctor part.
Yeah, she's actually a real doctor.
A real doctor, although
in
some MDs would say, you're not a real doctor. Real doctor is an MD.
Oh, well, but you know what MD stands for, doctor?
What's
MD
that?
actually stands for medical deity.
Medical deity.
Medical
I like
deity.
that. And
Yeah,
your father, I know your father was a doctor.
My father was a physician, and in many respects, I actually grew up around a plethora of physicians. I won't say doctors, although I was married to a psychologist, another doctor for quite a while. Yeah, and I learned that they have a bit of deity in them. So if your doctor's kind of giving you grief and is standing firm, it's simply because he's really an MD, medical deity.
So look, if I pull any deity here, then just, go ahead and knock me off the pedestal. I'm sure that
well, actually,
there have been
your own definition of PhD actually works very, very well from your psychological center. It's peaceful, healing dialogue.
And we're going to talk about that
Yes,
evening because it is a bridge to actually healing and keeping the connection going. And there's a way to dialogue so that you don't blow up the bridge of communication. So yes, that's an integral part of what I do with my patients and what we're going to do tonight. And the WTF part actually stands for what the Freud. And Freud is famous, and his contribution of the repetition principle, which is a something that we do unconsciously. We repeat things because the bottom line of the repeat is that we want to heal through. So we're not just idiots repeating and running through the maze. We're hoping to have a better ending to the story.
Now, is repeating things different than looping?
It's a loop.
Yeah.
It's a loop, but it's a loop with a purpose.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different in that there's an unconscious desire to complete that file, to complete the pain and complete the symptoms that really revolve around the original wound, which is the disconnect. So when I talk about what the Freud and the repetition principle, I'm really talking about patterns that I see come into my office and patterns that you yourself might recognize in your life. And one common pattern, of course, is entering into the similar pattern relationships. People break up with each other, for example, and then they find themselves in a relationship with a similar kind of person.
Deja vu.
Or maybe an opposite, which is also another kind of similar because it's a reaction formation against that other person that they now thought was the bad person, and now they pick up the other side of the coin, which is supposed to be the good person, never really bothering to heal the wounds within, so that they're magnetizing new injuries into their life. And that's how it works, folks, is that if you don't heal, then your blueprint is injured, and then you draw in other people who just click and fit right into the Lego pieces of that blueprint.
I wouldn't say you draw in. I'd say you one attracts.
Okay, attracts, right. Draw in is more of a positive, yes?
Right? I think sort of the attracts would be a better fit, at least from what I know.
So the what the Freud principle is really about wanting to heal an injury that's been looping around or repeating or however you want to put it, and we want an end to this. So we're going to track that in today's show, and we're going to really summarize everything that's gone on, because for those of you who have never listened to the show, I want to summarize a little bit so that you could be on the same mind map with us, and I don't want to lose anybody. Okay, so
yeah, we get really complicated and deep here.
Yeah, very complicated, and we're going to get deeper. I understand that the audience wants to
those
have
big fans, and thanks for being a
transformative.
fan of the show, and of course our audience is growing. Thank you.
Yeah, and it is a fact. I think that people today want transformative information. They want information that's actually going to paradigm shift them out of the old paradigm that they live in, a paradigm of pain, to a paradigm of beauty and interconnection and wholeness and unity. And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight.
And the last two previous shows were actually about panel 7, which is the paradigm shift. So if you want to know a little more about that, listen to those two shows.
Right, and to review what's been going on for the past many episodes, what we're tracking now is a system of thinking, and the system of thinking has to do with going to cause. So whenever we have a problem, whenever we have a symptom, whenever we have a presenting problem or something that pains us in life, then we have to understand that this didn't just come from the air. There is a cause to that pain or that symptom. So when we look to the cause, and Walt, do you have that mind map up there?
I do. For those of you that are listening to this on a podcast, which you can pull it from iTunes as well as Stitcher. Stitcher's a great app as well on your smartphone. You just punch in actually Dr. Judy, and it'll pop up on Stitcher pretty fast. We can go to www.drjudywtf.com, but there's a shot of the mind map for those of you seeing this live.
Yeah, thanks for having it up there, because this is a metaphor for the flow of life. And if you stare at panel 1, there's a lot of significance there. Panel 1 is really the first disconnect. If you can look at it and see the darkness within the light, the dark background, which is the proverbial blank slate, it's our potential, and then the light is our soul essence wanting to shine through, and on a more deeply spiritual level, it's about source, the light, God, whatever you want to call it, universal truth. I like to call it truth just because I'm very interested in universal truth from the perspective of resonance and synergy. And we talked about synergy last time.
Yes,
and
we
then
did.
when there's a spoken universal truth, then it all comes together in some kind of synergistic way, in the sense that people can recognize it and it resonates, and that's what I mean by universal. It's cross-cultural.
Well, the one thing that is really interesting, if you stop and think just for a moment about darkness, there's really only one thing that can get through and cut through that darkness, and that is light. It doesn't matter if it starts as a candle, but there has to be light. And the ultimate light is, the universal truth is unconditional love.
And if we're to talk about it from that perspective, Walt, then what we're talking about is that the first wound has to do with lack of unconditional love, which is the darkness. And so what it takes to form a healthy human psyche, a healthy human being, is a bunch of emotional ingredients. And these ingredients are eye contact, skin contact, breastfeeding, the rhythm of the heart, attunement, meaning that mother puts baby before herself, and she is able to soothe, and she's able to really understand the cues that the baby's giving off in terms of need for being fed or being changed or being too hot or too cold or whatever that
As
need
my father
is.
used to call that, the maternal instinct.
Right, and some fathers have it too. So, and by the way, when I say mother, infant, I mean primary caregiver. So if you're a father and you're the primary caregiver, I'm referring to you. And if you are a grandmother or an adoptive parent, I'm referring to you. So there's always a primary caregiver, and then there's a secondary caregiver. And good mental health means that we bond to the primary caregiver, because this is what we need to do. We need to healthily attach so that we can become strong and we can soak in the love, the nurturance, the information. We can sponge it in so that we can grow. So as this is happening and as disconnects are happening, what happens is that this perception of self, the self, which is the whole self, it becomes shattered. And if you look at panel 2, you'll see this kind of a shattering, and it's a metaphor for a shattered perception of life itself, a shattered perception of the self, and it really represents the reaction to the wound. And then this kind of turns gangrene over time and encodes into the fiber of the person's being. So the first primitive reaction is the anxiety from not being held or attuned to, or it's the holding in and the cutting off when the mother absolutely ignores the baby and the baby goes into kind of like a hopeless, helpless state. And then by panel 3, you can see the DNA strand, which is an encoding into the fiber of the person's being, and that's where those horrible, negative core beliefs live. Core beliefs like I'm not good enough, I'm worthless, I'm powerless, and on and on and on and on.
And
the
what's
list goes
interesting
on.
is that's when it's encoded and it becomes part of us. And as we like to say in the show, as a Judaism, is childhood is a hostage situation. And so therefore this encoding isn't our fault. We're I hate to use the words pop in my head, victim, but we've been trained and taught this, and the point is, down the road, it's part of us, and many times we try to defend the wound. In fact, we should not. We should identify it and kind of exercise it and get the virus out, which is what the mind map is so beautifully able to do.
Yeah, and I when I first started working with the mind map, it was actually a macro project designed to heal global disconnect, and then I decided to pare it down to healing human disconnect.
Well,
and
if you know,
that way I can experiment and use it with my patients and see concrete results.
well, the byline of the show is healing human disconnect, and if we are healing one individual at a time, eventually we're going to have a bunch, which therefore could strip. We talked about the butterfly effect, right? The ripple effect will then help to heal globally, and it does start on an individual basis.
I think so. So it's
Yeah,
an inside job, and
Definitely
I
an
think that
inside
when we
job.
have health within, then we're going to be able to share that with others and rebalance
And
the
we're going to
state
talk about
of
that today.
the emotional state of affairs of the world. So you can see the progression now. So there's the injury, the disconnect, and then there's the reaction, and then there's an encoding to it. And this encoding gets tripped up by life itself. So somebody comes along and makes the person feel worthless or stupid and powerless, and then bang, they're in panel number 4. They're in chaos because they can't handle those feelings because they have no ability to self-soothe. Remember, mom didn't do the job. So now the person can't internally do it for themselves, and now they're in chaos, and now there's a sense of confusion and emotional confusion. And so in defense of this chaos, they start using some defense mechanisms, and we've talked about some common ones like alcoholism or overeating or isolationism. There are lots of isms.
And smoking.
Or smoking,
Yep.
right, or shopping, or
Mhm.
porn, or just about anything that takes your mind off of the pain.
Yep.
And coats your
tries to fill in that hole in the soul.
right from the original wound itself. So you can see how this is a domino effect, and that's why I like to use the mind map, because I can help my patients track the entire system, and then we can go back over it and they can clean out the entire emotional system and reboot.
The success that Dr. Judy's had in this system, she calls me on a weekly basis. I had a patient that had this, that, and the other, and 2 months later, they're markedly improved. Not that this is a cure-all, although if it's done properly, the healing is true and permanent. But it's been very, very successful in helping a lot of people with a lot of challenges.
No, I really appreciate you saying that, Walt. And I think that the reason that's so is because I'm not dealing with the symptoms. I'm not dealing with managing them or
putting a
medicating
Band-Aid.
them or putting a bandage on them. I learned that the new correct word is bandage, and then the commercial word is Band-Aid. I learned something new the other day. Anyway, thought I'd
Okay.
share that. So anyway, when we try to code it over and we don't really go to the cause of the problem and the pain that it creates and really deal directly with that, which has been taboo for so long because it's not nice to talk about how our parents injured us. It's not nice to express how we really feel. Now, just to be clear, I'm not talking about blaming and shaming and criticizing your parent, because the blame and the shame and the criticism is just another way to not heal. Instead, there's another mechanism that we use in the system, and I'll get into it later with the peaceful healing dialogue.
Yeah,
So just make a note on that subject and understand
Stay tuned.
that, stay tuned soon.
Stay tuned.
This show.
And again, if you want to call us, you can. We're kind of diving into this pretty heavy today, but our number is area code 323-843-2826, and we welcome any calls to get on the couch with Dr. Judy.
So now we're in panel 5. Any of you out there in panel 5, meaning that you're sitting in your ism, you're using defense mechanisms to defend against the wound, and in this particular state, you can see that the original wound has now gotten so infected that it's turned into a tumor, and that's why panel 5 is represented metaphorically by these bubbles.
Yeah, well, then there's the infamous from Arnold Schwarzenegger from Kindergarten Cop. It's not a tumor.
It's not a tumor?
It's
Well,
not
it is
a
a tumor.
tumor.
It's a psychological tumor. And the tumor has to be really exorcised and has to be opened up. And that's part of the process. It sounds nasty, doesn't it? And
Well, I have a personal saying, and it's I've developed. I guess I hung around too many medical deity doctors. Is no surgery is painless.
well, the other option is that if you cook in your squat, right? And you stew in your ism, then that's going to eat you from the inside out.
And that's
so
the inference is if you need to have
that's
surgery,
not painless.
no matter what kind of surgery it is, it's better to have it done sooner than later.
Right. And my method is taking the bandage off quickly rather than
Yes,
letting the
very much so.
person just stew in it. And I'm not a fan of talk therapy. And I'm just not a fan because I don't really think that it's curative. It's not healing, although patients experience a sense of relief. But I can't tell you, Walt, how many people come to my practice and say, my last therapist spent the last 2 years asking me, and how does that make you feel? And nodding her head and then saying, check, please. Okay, so this is something that I do want to address. And for those of you who are professionals, it's really important to be empathic, of course. It really is important to tune into your patients and to listen. But by all means, that's not where the therapy stops. There's got to be a treatment plan, and the mind map is a treatment plan.
Is a roadmap. And
yes.
I mean, you're telling me almost on a weekly basis, hey, another patient graduated.
Right.
Meaning, they've gone through the 9 steps of the mind map and have identified the cause, identified the wound, and addressed it, and have had a paradigm shift, which we talked about last 2 shows, and they are well on their way of being healed and having that virus, whatever that challenge was, removed for good.
And one of the biggest compliments I got this week was from one of our fans who said that this is a paradigm shifting system, and it follows the scientific method, because there's got to be a system, and then there's got to be proof behind it, and it has to be replicable. And so I'm currently training an intern, and we'll be training more interns into the system. And pretty soon I'm going to have all 10 series up for professionals to watch via a Podbeam podcast, and I'll let you know when those are done. I'm done with 3 of them now.
Oh, cool. So you finished the first, the from part.
Yeah,
awesome.
the fun part. So going back
the from part.
The from part. So
from through to.
Almost done with that. So now we're going through, and the through is the most difficult part of the therapy, because there's a lot of healing that happens when people understand how the wound happened, because they're able to connect the dots. And once you're able to connect the dots and understand, the propensity is to calm down. It's not such a big mystery anymore. So just the information itself helps. Also, what helps a great deal is knowing that it's not your fault. You were not the cause of part 1 of your life.
Absolutely not.
You didn't make yourself. You didn't you didn't inject into the fiber of your being the information that was put in there. You did not store the computer the psychological virus into your system.
A simple, quick example might be when you were younger, and maybe you were driving in the car and you wanted to stop at some place to get some ice cream, and your father just yells, "What do you think we are, Rockefellers? What do you think, money grows on trees?" Well, if you hear those little clichéic phrases more than a few times, all of a sudden you end up with an idea of what money is and what money isn't.
Right.
And you're basically being encoded by your parents believing that money doesn't grow on trees versus believing that there is absolutely abundance of money and abundance of prosperity, and either you have a consciousness of lack or a consciousness of abundance. And unfortunately, we're all misprogrammed in some way, shape, or form in different aspects, but that's just a real simple example just to give people an idea of, how we get encoded and need to kind of take a step back and realize, hey, maybe that's not true.
And that's a great example, because once we're encoded, we live our lives through that encoding. Yes. That's our blueprint.
And we see that through those glasses, and they might be cracked, and so we need to give you a new prescription.
So once this formation of the defense mechanism kind of cooks us in our own squat and sort of poisons us, if you will, and it doesn't really defend, because ultimately unhealthy defense mechanisms eat us alive. Okay, alcoholism.
Yes.
And being a shopaholic will eat your finances like no other. Being
Gambling
a gambleaholic,
will toast it, no
right?
heartbeat.
Right. Okay, so that's not going to work. So ultimately, what happens at the end of that road is an implosion, which is a turning inward of anger, and that often will result in, well, the end game of that is, as you know, we've talked about it.
And in that show, we used the example of Elliot Rodger, who was a student in Santa Barbara and had his rampage, and he had actually had an explosion. Then, of course, he killed himself as an implosion.
Right. So that's the ultimate homicide, suicide. Right. So that defense mechanism broke down very radically and very quickly, and that was the end result of that. So at the end of that showdown, right, there's another kind of implosion and explosion, which is a therapeutic confrontation. Okay, and in panel 6, and I often find myself in panel 6, I'm confronting the lie that gets encoded into the fiber of the person's being, and through that confrontation actually creates light. So keep in mind that each panel has its positives and negatives, its yin and its yang, its cursed by design moments, and its very delicious and very elevating moments. And so as we travel through the mind map, then the paradigm shift is that when we are able to really take out the poison and reprocess all of this and express our truth to who done it, who wounded us, and really express it as an exercise in cleaning out the repressed emotions. No more than that. It's not an exercise in throwing mommy under the bus or daddy under the bus. This is an exercise sheerly designed to really express the pain and the injury behind all of our symptoms, all of our isms, and it's a cleansing. It's a cleansing. Yeah. So now we've gotten to panel number 7, which is the interconnection.
And folks, just want you to know, you are listening to Dr. Judy, WTF, and I'm your host, Walt Lusk, and we have in studio, as we do every time, Dr. Judy Rosenberg, who actually has a really full-time practice in the Los Angeles area, in the Sherman Oaks area, and she's available for consults not only in person, but through phone consults. So even if you hear her voice anywhere in the United States, you can actually set up a consult and do the process. You don't have to be here. It's helpful, but not totally required. So just food for thought in that regard.
We take care of everybody at the Psychological Healing Center, which is the name of the healing center. And
we're working on doing Skype, so I have a little bit more connection, because the byline of the show, of course, is Healing Human Disconnect. And we've found that we as individuals are more disconnected as a family, as a couple, in our jobs, as a country, and of course, as a world.
Right. So we're reaching out via Skype, and also for people who are financially challenged. We have an intern who works on a sliding scale basis, and a life coach who also works on a sliding scale basis. So we'll take care of you. We will not disconnect from you.
Absolutely not.
So once we move from the paradigm of darkness and blockage and poison past and emotional injuries, and we clean all that out, we now have the ability to interconnect, meaning that we have more wholeness. We have more to share with another human being. So if you look at panel number 7, what you will see is a bunch of orbs coming together.
And there's some light in it as well.
Right, which can represent the new self, the new healed ism, the healthy humanistic ism, and then the different parts of the mind, body, soul that are now healthy enough to come together with other individuals.
One of my aha moments for the mind map is if you just simply look at panel 1 and you have this sort of light coming, it's kind of enveloped into the darkness, and then going through the whole process of the mind map and ended up in panel 7, you've got more light and more vibrant cells or whatever that's in there.
Right.
So in other words, it's not murky, it's not covered up, and it's not in darkness, even though there is some darkness, but there's a lot more light and a lot more clarity.
And a lot more flow because we're
Yes.
enervated now. We're not blocked. Have you ever sat with your legs crossed and you get up and you can't feel anything? Well, sometimes traumas do that to us. They block us up and then we become shut down and we become unfeeling, or we become the opposite. We become angry and act out and so on. So once we start clearing the blockages, there's just more flow
Absolutely.
available and more
Absolutely.
light and
Yes.
more life force. So now that we've
More freedom.
and freedom and
Yeah.
clarity, right?
Clarity.
I talk
I
about
say clarity is king.
right. I talk about the big eye and the little eye. And the big eye, if you look at panel 1, it looks like a kind of like an occluded eye to me. It just
Yeah, it
stands
does.
out that way. That's just all foggy and clear, and that represents the compromised self, which I call the little I, the little me. And then the big eye, which is the clearer, self-esteemed piece of us, the wholeness of us, is now represented in panel number 7 as a whole entity that is healthy enough to connect. And so from that place, we're going to now go into panel number 8. I know that was a long journey to panel 8, but here we are in panel 8, and panel 8 is all about encoding.
The recoding. Recoding?
The
Encoding?
recoding. First, we encoded with a bunch of lies, and we took those lies down, and we fell into chaos just because whenever there is an old system that's got to go. Remember when the communistic system went down, right? And people freaked because they didn't know how to
Tear down this wall, in the infamous words of President Ronald Reagan, and all his advisors told him, do not even think about going there. And, of course, he did, and the rest, they say, is history.
And there was a
Tear
lot of
down this
chaos,
wall.
wasn't
Yes,
there?
there was a lot of chaos.
And then now rebuilding. So now you can see that when you tear down something, even though it's dysfunctional and may not work for everybody, the tearing down itself is also very, very painful. And then what ends up happening in this horrible interim of going through the process is it's traumatic, but in a way of cleansing.
Just as a way of entree, I'd like to, if I can, read a couple of paragraphs of Judy's book that she's frantically working on, Healing Human Disconnect. And this is, of course, panel 8, Healing and Recoding. It's your duty, your human responsibility, especially now that your slate is clean of the infiltrations of the past, to help give back to the rest of the world by sharing your own healing light. As the great Indian guru, author of the autobiography of Yogi stated, quote, life is chiefly service. But before you're able to truly give back the full essence of your heart's gifts, you must recode yourself. Your cancer is beyond remission. It's gone. The poison has been drained. The tissues are removed and their infection sewn up and are now scarring over. You're now the ideal position to recode yourself with a more accurate, life-affirming, and positive core belief. This recoding will also help you pass along a healthy psychological blueprint to the next generation.
Right, and that's where that multi-generational thing comes in, because this is kind of like a healing within and then a healing backward, because when done right, you can actually heal your parents, because then
Yes.
they become responsible for their piece in it, and then they start cleaning that piece, and it's a healing of self, it's a healing backwards, and it's a healing forwards.
Yeah, backwards and forwards.
And so the ladder of panel 8 represents that, the healing backwards, because it's up and down, and then there's a healing of the self, and then it's the people of the DNA are immersed in water, which is pH 7, which is a neutrality. There's no longer a lot of toxic waste around.
It's not acidic.
It's nice and neutralized, as we are once we clean out, and then there's an opportunity to really choose who and what we want to be. We want to choose carefully who we want to invite into our lives. We want to choose carefully the thoughts that we want to hold in our head. We want to choose carefully the ethics, the philosophies that we want to use as a structure to build our foundation on. And that's
That's-
our opportunity.
Yes, it is. That's what Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits and then 8 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the habits that really impacted me was being proactive as opposed to reactive. If
Yes.
you've got something that you want to do, accomplish, or be, then when events occur to you, you're not reacting to those events. You are saying, "Hey, does this, help me? And how do I, deal with it?" And so therefore, you're dealing more from a core and being proactive and trying to set stuff up as opposed to just running around being a fireman, putting fires out, and being reactive.
Yeah, and so panel 3 is a bunch of reactive codes
Yes.
because it comes from the wound. So if you
Right.
look at panel 3 and you compare it to panel 7, you'll see that panel 3 is built on faulty structure
yes.
because it falls apart into chaos. And panel 8 is really a whole and complete person who's able to share, and you can see that the people on the ladder are holding hands, so they're
Yeah, they're
able
actually.
to
If you look
share.
go on www.drjudywtf.com, you can see a copy of the mind map. And I didn't realize it, but there are actual little peoples,
Little peoples.
little peoples,
Right.
the little peoples,
Right.
that is actually on that. I mean, and just quoting another line here from your book, it is now time to repair, renew, and replenish the body, mind, and soul back to its natural state of being.
Yes.
Health, sustainability, and longevity. Now think about that for a minute, folks. Think about where you are. Think about what you've gone through. It doesn't matter where you've been and what you've gone through. How about a situation where you truly wake up in the morning and you have the natural state of being that we all really want to strive for, and being healthy, sustainable, and have longevity in terms of where we are psychologically and
Yes,
our mental health.
and
It can happen and it can occur.
And one of the key principles in keeping transformation, because a paradigm shift is transformative in that you're not seeing through the lens of the lie any longer. It's a clear-eyed perception
Yeah, you got a
of
new prescription.
self and other and the world at large. And so when we are seeing through cracked lens, it actually
It's distorted.
sets us up to devolve.
Yeah, it's
And
distorted.
it actually sets us up to devolve, and when we're seeing through a clear lens, it actually sets us up to evolve.
That's a concept. Devolve.
Devolve.
That's a word for you. Okay.
Well, I don't know if I made that up, but
Yeah.
it sounds good.
It works.
Yeah, it works. So either we're evolving or we're devolving, and in order to keep transformation and to continue to evolve, service is a huge component of keeping the light. If you want to keep the light, you have to share the light, and it becomes generative. So panel 8 is now generative. It's sustainable. It's growth producing, as opposed to the death code. Like a cancer cell is the death code, and then a healthy embryo is the life code. So now we've got a life code there, as opposed to a disconnect and a bunch of psychological viruses running the show. Now we've got a connect, and we've got a system of maintaining connection.
And plug in.
Right. And now we've got also the negative aspect of this, Walt. We spoke about this today, about people who climb on your ladder. Just remember last time we talked about interconnection. We talked about vampiring.
We talked about vampiring. Yes, we did.
Right. And vampiring is when people pretend to connect with you and they're not really connecting with you. They're actually sucking your blood. They're sucking your emotions, and they leave you very depleted emotionally and drained. And you can tell that you're with the vampire because they're taking and not giving.
Right. We talked about givers versus takers.
Yes, and so now carrying this forth into panel number 8, there are also people who will act as if they're sharing. They will act as if they're being your friend.
But
However,
they're not.
they're not.
Like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Correct. And I want to talk about one particular concept that I learned about this year called affinity fraud. And for any one of you who has been affinity frauded, thank you. That's a mouthful. It's something like this. You know somebody for many years. They know you. They know your habit patterns. They know your financial situation. They know your vulnerabilities. And they step in right when you're vulnerable and they come in to rescue you. And boy, does it feel good, because it feels like somebody has your back. And before you know it, you're investing in them and you're trusting them, and they're siphoning off your money. They're siphoning off whatever they can grab a hold of. And at the end of that journey, they let you down. And instead of holding your hand, they drop you.
You think you think they're your friend, but when the rubber meets the road, they're not around.
Right. And this is the ultimate betrayal,
Right.
because it's when friends betray friends that it hurts the most, because we're going back to the original wound. When mother betrayed infant, that was the first betrayal, and it's a recapitulation of that.
Actually, one of the first betrayals, if you want to go back 2,000 years from now, from here, is Judas Iscariot. Right? He was one of the chosen 12 by Jesus, for those of you that follow Christianity, and was one of the 12 apostles. And obviously, in any barrel, there's usually one bad apple, and Judas happened to be the particular one. But the point is that as a result of him giving, he was basically bribed with 30 pieces of silver, he showed who needed to know who Jesus truly, truly was, and betrayed him. And so therefore, it's right there. And if you remember, Christ forgave him and loved him.
And there's the unconditional love,
he gave
right?
Unconditional love. He absolutely did. And Judas couldn't handle it, and he actually committed suicide. But that's the point is, he was on the inside. He was one of them. He'd been around Christ since the beginning. He was chosen. And he betrayed and threw it all away. And we're going to talk more about this. I think we're going to have to continue this.
I think so.
We've got a lot more to talk about. We're going to do another double session here on panel 8. But
it's a juicy panel.
It was a lot to cover, right? Judas Iscariot was a classic example. Another one is Marcus Brutus, who betrayed Julius Caesar, right? He was in the inside and realized that Julius was just getting a little bit out of control, and he actually, joined in the plot to oust Julius Caesar from power.
And thus the famous phrase, "Es-tu Brute?" meaning,
absolutely.
You too?
You too. That's it. Yep, that's it. We've got a few more minutes here, so you want to elaborate on that, or you want to talk about
absolutely.
A testimonial you've on this regard?
Well, yeah, I want to let me bring in a testimonial here, or rather a case study, a common theme of a case study, because I think the biggest injury of all is not sometimes what happened, but it's the betrayal of the others surrounding the incident. And I see this in my practice all the time. You see this in the case of child abuse. Child gets abused, the memories get jarred, and then the child gets in touch with what happened, and mommy gets told, or oftentimes not told, but sometimes mommy is told what happened, and then mom says, shh, 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 let's not talk about this. This is going to ruin the family.
Yeah, just shovel under the carpet.
It's going to kill your father if he finds out that his brother abused your sister, abused you, or whatever is going on. And then there's this hush, hush. And
absolutely.
That is one of the biggest betrayals a human being can. It is the biggest
absolutely.
Betrayal. So sometimes it's not only the trauma of the molest, the incident, it's a betrayal trauma.
Well,
occurs.
And in that respect, I mean, you talk about a ripple effect. I mean,
yes.
That ripples multiple families, multiple individuals,
right?
And has, lifelong damage. Another example of that, and along those lines, is the Catholic Church. Right, you trust you trust your priest, you trust your father,
of course.
right?
Right.
And they abused boys a lot,
right?
And there is some people's faith in God, an authority figure that pulled this off, and it wasn't your family. That again has tremendously huge ripple effects as well.
Yeah, that's another kind of betrayal,
absolutely.
Isn't it? It's
huge,
not affinity
huge
betrayal,
betrayal.
but it's an affinity thing, because you're supposed to trust your priest, you're supposed to trust your rabbi, you're supposed to trust your leaders, you're supposed to trust your teachers, and you're supposed to trust your parents. So connect the dots, folks.
Yeah, and if you can't trust your priest, you can't trust your parents, you can't trust your family, who in the hell can you trust?
And when the blueprint is such that you can't trust your parents because that basic trust has been broken, then it's really, really hard to trust the world. Really, really hard.
Yes. Yes, it is. It certainly is. So I think we should shrink it. We're going to do a tune. I think we're going to do Backstabbers. How about that?
Let's go for it.
Okay, it was a song by the OJs from many moons ago. It's entitled "The Backstabbers." When you hear this, you'll remember this, and we'll talk about this. And the other song by the OJs we're going to save for next time. But the title song is Backstabbers. So I'm going to read the lyrics. We're going to shrink it here. What they do, they smile in your face all the time. They want to take your place. The backstabbers. They smile on your face all the time. They want to take your place. The backstabbers.
Well, from a panel 8 point of view, we're talking about affinity fraud. We're talking about betrayal. So what do people do? They come on as if they're your friend. They hold your hand. You rely on them. And so you think to yourself, I'm on safe footing here. I'm being contained from a metaphorical point of view. I'm surrounded by unconditional love. Mommy's good. Mommy's to be trusted. And then, whoops, there's a little knife in my back. They're backstabbers. They smile in your face, and that's the affinity part of it. And then they're not really well-intentioned at all after all.
It's funny talking about a knife in your back. There was a story this week about a guy who walked into McDonald's and wasn't feeling too well, and literally there was a knife in his back.
Ooh.
And he passed out and had to go to the hospital, but
Wow.
He had it in for a day or so and just didn't want to go get help. All you back to the song. All you fellows who have someone and you really care, then all of you fellows who better beware. Somebody's out to get you, lady. A few of your buddies, they sure look shady. Blades are long, clenched tight in their fist, aiming straight at your back, and I don't think they'll miss.
So this is very intentional.
Yeah,
it's
very
straight. There's a straight line.
Intense and
right.
intentional.
It's intentional. It's directional. And all you fellows who have someone and you really care, and here it makes a reference to a jealousy. Somebody's going to get your lady. Well, they're stabbing you in the back, so I'm going to have my revenge at them and direct connect with the knife in their back. Another form of connection. Yeah. Oh my God.
What they do, they smile in your face all the time. They want to take your place, the backstabbers. I keep getting all these visits from my friends. Yeah, they're doing to me what they're doing to me. They come to my house again and again and again. Yeah. So are they there to see my woman? I don't even be home, but they just keep on a-coming. What can I do to get on the right track? I wish they'd take some of those knives off my back.
Right. So here's the betrayal. They're coming into his territory and bursting through his boundaries, right? Because apparently this person doesn't know how to set boundaries, and he's inviting some pretty negative folks into his life, and he keeps getting all these visits. So when you hear the visits, it's sounding like, oh, maybe it's a nice little visit with a tray of cookies, but no, not quite. They're there to, come into my house. They're there to see my woman.
Well, they're probably coming in with a tray of knives.
Oh.
Or they've already been taken off the tray. So
and not to cut the cookies with.
No,
either.
No. So what they do, they smile in your face. Smiling faces sometimes tell lies. Those backstabbers. They smile in your face. I don't need low down, dirty bastards. Those backstabbers.
Right.
So that is Backstabbers.
Smiling faces.
Smiling faces, Backstabbers by the OJs.
Thank you.
So if you have some queries, questions, comments, you want a song shrunk, you can reach us at info@drjudywtf.com. That's info@drjudywtf.com. I'm your host, Walt Lusk. And, of course, this is Dr. Judy Rosenberg with her mind map. And next week, we're going to continue our session talking about panel 8 and the healing and encoding. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, enjoy the song. And thanks a lot for listening.
And thank you for listening and tuning in.
And we lost it.